Just okay. And it looks like we are live. This is good. No technical difficulties despite the troubled morning. So without further ado, let's begin. So welcome to the Q&A and critique. Number, I guess you could say 54. The Let's Bforartists edition number 54. Sorry. Okay, let me just gather my thoughts. So today is an interesting day because we have 2 official releases and some news. And we also have a special guest. We're here with Iyad Ahmed, who's been a developer of Bforartists and who has worked with a number of different add-ons and other things in the Blender community. He's a titan in the code, he knows what he's doing, and I'm extremely honored to interview him today, even though I've known him for a while. So, how are you doing, Iyad?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Excellent. So Iyad here is going to be, we're going to be talking with Iyad about the next version of Bforartists 3.2.2, which is based on Blender 3.2.2. And we've got a couple of new features with this. And on the latter half of today, we also have, drumroll, a surprise guest. So we're going to be talking about the flagship project that we have been working with over the past 8 months, more or less. And we're going to be talking with a surprise guest when he comes online about this particular project that has been going live this week for an official music video release this evening. I still have a lot of rendering and compositing to do to finish it, but as soon as this call and meeting is over, I get back to work and we get everything ready to publish this evening, and it's super exciting, and I wanted to interview the special guest about this project and also get you ready with all of these new features and all of these new projects. So let's begin. So first things first, we haven't actually released, I always say first things first, we haven't actually released Bforartists 3.2.2, but we're currently, with Iyad's help, compiling it and getting it ready. Setting up the documentation, which is up to date, including the new hair curves, including the new geometry nodes, everything you need to know with the latest from Blender. And we will be releasing this maybe on Monday or Sunday. So Iyad, tell us about this new release. What's the most exciting part about this piece, and what hand did you have with this particular project?
Well, the most exciting thing is that we are keeping Bforartists updated from all with all the new features from Blender. So because we merge every week, so we keep up to date with it. And another thing that is exciting is our own additions. So any menu that doesn't have an icon in Blender, we add an icon for it, as you already know. And any text that is middle aligned, right? So there is a lot of wasted space and the text might not be fully visible. We left align our checkboxes and menus and all other UI elements so that we don't waste any space. And basically keeping all this up to date with all the changes in the code that comes from Blender is really the biggest chunk of work that we
That's really, yeah, there's a lot of good things. So how did you start to get into Bforartists, and why do you work with this code?
Well, I was working on my personal projects a couple of years ago, and maybe 2 years ago you approached me, and I got into the project. I started with the little things, and then every time I upped the game until there was a lot of stuff before art.
All right, excellent. Yeah, I remember talking with you in a while back, and I was like, because I've been focusing a lot on client work, and I've been doing a lot of projects with Bforartists over the many years, ever since I knew Tiles, who was the founder of this project from the True Space community. So I always wanted to give back to the software because it has given me a lot. And I saw you, and yeah, you're very good at what you do. So what do you do you mentioned something about keeping up to date with Blender every week. What does this entail? What do you do every week, more or less?
Okay, so every week we basically update our code to be in sync with Blender because Blender is changing, but our code is a copy of it with a lot of changes in it. So if you want to keep it in sync, you have to merge. And the problem is some things not be automatically merged by the versioning system. So you have to go in manually and edit things and making sure they work. And sometimes things don't appear in the conflicts, uh, merge conflicts. So you have to always make a debug build and make sure everything is working and run your test suite. So it takes a number of to get things done every week. Right? So
That sounds like a lot of work. How much time do you usually take doing this type of work every week?
it varies, but I usually get things done like in a day. Like it doesn't sound much, but if something is very difficult, then it will take more than a day, of course.
Gotcha. All right. So that's kind of cool. So I wanted to ask you, you also do a couple of other things inside the community as well. I saw that you're very active in the BPY Discord server, which is a Blender server dedicated to the API of Blender. And you also have a couple of add-ons and code that you have been working with, including FX Nose, which is a variant that Persbeats in the chat has mentioned, which is a very good substance designer node pack, I guess you could say. Could you tell us a bit more about your other work?
So FX nodes worked on it some time ago, and some time ago, this is like kind of wasn't updated for a while, but it's still functioning very well. And if you want to have more procedural nodes in your editor, then go
You
get it.
do? You have another time for you have an update coming up, I guess you could say?
For now, I don't, but yeah, I can't update perfection. Yes.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, well that's kind of cool. All right, so let's take a look at what's new within Bforartists 3.2.2. So we have currently merged in the latest from Blender, which includes in the nodes we've got the new volume to mesh and the volume cube node. Volume to mesh I think is a bit old, but volume to cube is new. We also have this new node called interpolate domain for the geometry nodes. The interpolate domain is a node which kind of works similar to the accumulate field, except it's more like a filter that you can use fields that haven't been or that are already established. So it's a good way to like call different things instead of using the accumulate field node, which requires.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Do you mean you added the mesh to volume node or the volume to mesh node?
Volume to
Because
mesh.
There was always a volume to mesh.
The volume cube node, sorry, that came out from last release.
There was a new node called mesh to volume node.
It might be here, might be not. If it's not in the Blender Master, it's not here yet.
It should be. I'm not sure though. I think it was added around the same time as the volume cube node.
It's under mesh.
Mesh to volume, yes, it's here.
That's probably what you meant,
Yeah, so
as
there we
opposed
go.
to volume to mesh. Just that I thought that's what you. Yeah.
Yeah, you know more than me. My biggest excitement about this package is basically with the maintenance of the Blender and the latest features and things like that, keeping up to date, adding in tooltips to what these nodes do, adding in the icons to the header, and adding in the icons into the ad shelf. We've also started creating a default asset library. So this is now currently shipping in the next release, and this default asset library comes with a number of materials that we've already shipped before, and also some light libraries and a couple of other things. Obviously this is just a first iteration, so basically it comes as an add-on. So if you go into your user preferences, if you want to use this as an experiment, it is still experimental, but you can search for asset and then turn on the add-on Bforartists default asset library. Once it's on, if you're in Discord, my Discord just crashed. Just give me a moment. Sorry guys, my Discord crashed at the moment.
Whoops.
Yeah. Let me go back on live. I was still live online, but that's okay. All right, so the default library. As I mentioned earlier, in the user preferences, you can load up the default library and use the assets. So we come with like materials which are organized into groups where we have collections, static meshes. We've got a couple of backgrounds. Let me just make this bigger. Just basic backgrounds. We plan to add more of these later. We also have a shader ball, custom shader ball, which I made last week. We've also got these light libraries from the MATLib library add-on, no longer necessary to use the add-on. So you can just drag and drop these collections and use them how you want. We also have a large collection of materials, default materials from the VX library, which is an open source content that was shipped with Blender, I think. Don't remember. So we've added a new category called rubber, and we started cleaning up the materials a little bit to start making like ceramic, cloth, foliage, glass, things like that, liquid metals, and more. I've added new custom I guess you could say shader balls for the metals, which I plan to update for all of them for a higher quality or a better experience, and also add tags and extra information and things like that per material. And we plan to make sure that everything is framed, cleaned, consistent, and useful so that you can drag and drop all these assets as the asset browser grows. So with this concept, the idea is to keep these mostly procedural and performant. If you want some of your content included, there's a possibility that we can ship this as a default. And on top of that, we've also started adding in some node groups. So for example, I have a couple of edgeware that I use for work. And these edgeware node groups give us ability to create different types of techniques that work either in Eevee, there's one that works in Eevee, or ones that work only in cycles, so that you can have edge noise, edge break, ambient occlusion to draw the dirtiness, and also the edge of the bevel or other techniques. We still don't have ambient occlusion based curvature or edge detection yet, but there is a possibility that I'll be adding that one too. And on top of that, I've also added two texture coordinate nodes. One is called triplanar mapping, which is a node that I talked about last week, and the world space node, which is basically it adds a null to your scene, and it detects this null and uses it as a world space. So that's one thing that's missing inside of Blender is access to world space coordinates. You only have object space coordinates. So this just adds an extra world space.
There should be a world space called position.
Position?
Yes, geometry, the node called geometry. And it should be called position.
But that would be the
That should
position
give you
of the
world
object.
space. It gives you coordinates from the center of the world.
So if I move this to the side, okay. Alright, so maybe it's not useful. Alright, and the triplanar helps there. So in this case, I need your help to make this asset browser more complete. Other concepts that we're thinking about is this, I'm still planning on the user experience of this, is adding a concept of using nodes for layering in a PBR system, which is very typical of other add-ons. And in this case, you could, for example, make it nice and easy to mask different types of, using the edgeware, for example, you could plug in an edgeware from Cycles, or you could bake it out, use this to drive two different types of materials within a PBR set. Blender doesn't have PBR channels, but you can do it through nodes. The idea is that ultimately, in the future, we have compositor nodes, geometry nodes, shader nodes, all with the categories to have not only lower level node groups, but also higher level node groups for a lot, or to save you time and make work much easier. Not just on a material level, but also in a geometry level and a compositor level. So lower level should become node groups and functions that should be included by default with a whole bunch of different static meshes or procedural meshes and things like that. This is the first iteration. This is just the beginning of a very long chapter that we hope to include with Bforartists, and 3.2.2 is the beginning of this. And obviously, it could also be a collaborative effort. I know Blender is planning to do this in the future as an opt-in feature. This is still opt-in as well, but the more complete it becomes, maybe we'll make it an actual default. Where you can just, when you're in your current file, you select your default library and you just get to work. So the other interesting thing with Bforartist 3.2.2 is that we've been polishing and refactoring a lot of the code for the brush panel, which is another add-on. So if you notice earlier on, I have a number of brushes here on the side panel listed with their own custom iconography, which I used for creating a character. Unfortunately, character is an NDA, but I can still show the brushes. And in this case, these brush panels is basically exposing these brushes into a top panel. And this panel here can be used dynamically also inside of the actual texture paint editor. You can use it in the future, the grease pencil, but right now we have weight paint, texture paint, vertex paint in both the image editor and in the 3D viewport for creating custom brushes with their icons. So if you want to make a brush, for example, this one here, you can create a draw brush, for example, and you want this draw brush to have a certain fall off to use an airbrush, for example. And you can save it, you can store it, you can add a name, and you can also expand it and use different types of brushes or techniques to bring out the color and things like that of what you want to do. So it's a handy way to save time to store brushes. Hopefully in the future we find a way to store brushes as well. So Shmuel asks, how do you add the empty at the same time as the node group, or is it already in the scene? If the node group is stored as an asset, it will automatically call any data that has been linked to it into the scene. So if you drag and drop into an empty scene, it will add the world space null. The geometry position is good, but when you have a null linked to it, you can just transform, scale, or move the null to kind of give you some ability. So I'm not sure if we should remove it or keep it or not. A good question. All right, so this is mostly all the hard work. So Iyad, I wanted to get back to you, and I wanted to ask you, what are your hopes or ambitions for Bforartists? What would you like to see in the future, and what are your inspirations or aspirations concerning your skills with Blender code, with the add-ons that you work? You're getting better and better every day. I really admire your work. I'm extremely thankful for what you do for for this software. I don't think I could do anything without you. But I wanted to know what type of things would you like to do? Where would you like to go with your skills?
So first, I want to talk about what I aspire for in Bforartists, which is a number of things really. In the future, I would like to basically revise the Bforartists code. So over the last couple of months, or over the years, yearly, might there might have been some things that accumulated, like some small bugs or some annoyances. So really would like to revise the code more and refactor it, and maybe make it more readable. And also another thing is automating some of the tedious work, like releasing Bforartists, which is currently manual. So it'd be nice if we set up some sort of automatic build system like Blender somewhat does with its releases. And that's it for Bforartists. For me personally, I would like to contribute more to Bforartists and Blender. I already contributed some stuff to Blender, most recently the new STL importer. So it makes STL importing much faster. So if you are doing a patch import, you will definitely notice a difference. And also, I'm trying to finish a patch by someone, I don't remember the name, but basically allows you to, it's a geometry node, right? So it allows you to sample points inside the mesh. Basically, yeah, I just want to contribute more, and this is what I want to do for the next couple of years.
Oh, that's cool. All right. So with this prank, I really want to support you even more. You know that over the time so every now and then I like to sponsor you, but I know many other people could. You're a developer, you've been doing things with the Blender source, you've been doing this with the software, so I wanted to ask, how can people support you? Do you take commissions, or do you run a Patreon or something?
So yes, I do take commissions if someone wants to create an add-on, for example, or maybe you want to improve something about Blender or Bforartists. I can try to get it in. I've done it before. So I also have.
Sorry about the jet. That was a big jet, sorry about that.
Yeah. So let me send this 1 moment. Of course, I keep my Twitter DMs open and my Discord DMs. So yeah, this is a link. I was just going to send it, but
yeah. So in the chat, I uploaded his link tree, which contains all the social networks where you can follow everything that he's doing, the little projects, the things he's doing for Blender, and also some ability to brew him a cup of coffee. Keeps him going. Oh, well, thanks, Iyad. So this release of 3.22, which comes with a number of fixes from Blender, which I think are about 26 or 20 something bug fixes from Blender, a bunch from us, the new asset browser, more stability and refactoring of the brush panel so it works faster and even better, the new panel inside the image editor and in the texture paint mode, and also a number of all the extra features from Blender is now included, including documentation for the curves of the new sculpt mode in the curves. So for example, if I create this object and I add underneath curves, I have an empty hair object, and inside the empty hair object underneath sculpt mode, I can start using the density brush, and you can use the add brush just to add like single hairs, You can do a selection pane, or you can start combing your brushes directly from the interface, and now all of this is documented inside of the Bforartists documentation before it's cool with Blender. So have fun. You can start using this to access the geometry nodes curves data from this hair object inside and create your own modifiers for clumping or other things like this. So this is now currently in the master as well. Thanks, Blender. So without further ado, our secret guest has actually arrived. And we also have another project that we've been working on here. So I want to introduce you to Ojax, or aka DJ Unknown, who is my commissioner of this project, who has been kind enough to have this project open and also is now releasing the project online. So Ojax, hello, how are you?
Good. Trace, thanks for having me on the call. Or on the chat. Yeah.
Excellent. So tell us about yourself. Who are you and where did you come from? And you are unknown, but I'd like to know a bit more.
Yeah, let's see, where do I start? I mean, I've been DJing for years, so that's kind of where I started as a hip hop DJ. And then sort of, growing up around music and then wanting to get into making music, I started looking at, digital production and sampling records and traditional hip hop production. Was part of a band that released music. I'm based out of Canada, so we released music up here in Canada, and we had some pretty decent success, which is how I met Purs, who's on the call here. I see. We started doing music together. He was part of the band that was supporting our group. It was pretty cool. And then, everybody in the group sort of got married, had kids, et cetera, et cetera. And I was sort of left, well, what am I going to do? Because I still like making music. So I started writing my own music, sort of independently. And that's where the root of this idea and this project came about, is that I was sort of sitting down like, I've never really made the music that I wanted to make. I've always collaborated with people and explored collaborative ideas, and I'm not a writer. Like, I didn't write lyrics, so typically, the guys who would write the lyrics would have concepts and I'd sort of build around those. But this time I sat down, I thought, like, I want to do what I want to do, and I'm heavily into comic books and science fiction movies and sci-fi fantasy novels and these kinds of things, and animation. So I just had all these ideas swirling in my head, and I started writing this concept record, which I eventually titled Leaving Earth, about a disgruntled former DJ who's in the future and is just so frustrated with the commercialization of all forms of art. And he lives in this sort of dystopian society. And he just wants to leave Earth because he's sick of it and explore and find meaning and find new inspiration. So I started writing this whole record. And it was, again, all sample based, and I was using all these different plugins and programming drums. And funny enough, I played it for Purs, and he's like, "Oh, dude, this record's awesome. You should have a real drummer on it." And I was like, "Oh, yes, that would be good." And obviously, him being a drummer, we thought about exploring that avenue. And I played it for another one of my buddies, his guitarist. He's like, "Oh, dude, this record's really good. You should have real guitars on it." So this started making the idea like, well, then maybe I should just take this record and record it with a live band, which we ended up doing. And then, so the record was there, finished, fantastic. And I started talking to a buddy of mine who works in animation, cartoons, 2D, doing layouts. And initially we had tried to scope out what the animation would look like. But to be quite honest, it was a stretch for him to do, and it was probably out of scope. So I ended up spending like a year working with him. We had, all we ended up sort of really at the end with was concept drawings. And I was talking to Purs about it, and he's like, "Oh, dude, you should talk to my friend Dre's." And this is where Purs started really getting involved in the Blender community and showing the stuff that he was working on. I was like, "Oh, this is crazy, man." And he's like, "Oh, dude, you need to talk to Dre's." So he put me in contact with Dre's, and this is where the whole idea really kicked off. Dre's is like, "Okay, tell me what you want. Send me inspirations and different reference materials that you've been using." And so Dre's is showing the comic book that I did. So part of this like I said, I'm hugely influenced by comic books. So I started telling the story myself. And so I ended up drawing, writing, and penciling this comic. I actually sent it out. I outsourced it for coloring because I suck at coloring. Um, so I had this. I had other reference material, and Dre's like, send it all to me, and let me just take a look at it. So Dre's was able to look at all the reference materials, the styles that I was into. As you can see here, like the sketchy looking artist style, like the very painter watercolor paint from one of my favorite comic book artists, Bill Sienkiewicz.
Sienkiewicz, yes. There he is.
Yeah. So like this was a huge influence for me. Even as a kid, like I was just drawn to his art style. It's just so, and the stories that he was involved in telling, Daredevil and Moon Knight, like these really dark, gritty street stories. And I really wanted that feel on this project. That, along with the other ones you're seeing, the Ralph Bakshi animation, like Lord of the Rings. Um, what else did Bakshi do? The 1969 Spider-Man.
Ollie.
Yeah, Cool World. Like he's done a lot of really
Cool
cool
World.
stuff. Wizards.
Ooh.
So the styles kind of worked well together. And what was great was Dre's got it. Like he figured it out. He's like, "Oh, I see what you want to do." And then started building the various environments. And we went back and forth a number of times, getting the feel right and getting the painterly effect to work. And I mean, here we are, right? Like he's showing
Yeah.
you some of the stuff that's happening, and it's like, holy man, this is what we were going for. And I wasn't like, when I was working with the previous animator, I was settling for more traditional line art, and it wasn't quite conveying the same feel. So, and then the idea kind of grew, because in the time that I'd finished writing the Leaving Earth record, I was producing other music, and I had this just quirky concept of like, in this same future, there's a guy who runs an Android repair shop, like he repairs robots. And he's sort of also this disgruntled former musician who now runs a repair shop to be able to pay bills. And I put out an EP where it's like you get he's getting voice messages from disgruntled customers who have robots that he needs to repair, and he's just frustrated, and it's sort of like hinting at the grind of having a 9 to 5 when you really want to pursue your passions and things like that. And Drace was like, "Oh, dude, we can do some animations for these videos, for these songs, and start telling the story now, building up to Leaving Earth." So what we've got is basically 3 albums. We've got the Android Repair Shop. I've got another one in the middle that sort of sets more of the world building tone, coming up to Leaving Earth. And the way it looks now is we're going to be developing this animation style, developing the story, and growing the whole concept as we build towards the Leaving Earth album. So that's it in a nutshell. I know it's kind of a lengthy
this is
tale, but that's sort of
excellent.
where we're at.
This is excellent. Yes, this has been a very long project, I can attest to that. And we've been doing it 100% inside Bforartists. And it started, the project started with these ideas, studying the other artists and studying how they work. But from there, we started working on the technology, which was very primitive at the beginning. Just understanding the concepts, different ideas that we can work with as a tech, I guess you could say, to see if we could reproduce something that could make us a lot of content with very little effort for a very ambitious project of transmedia. So I wanted to ask you, can you clarify what is transmedia? What is this general project? You mentioned there are music albums, but how does this tie in with the paint? How does this tie in with the art style? What are we doing?
And it's funny because you educated me onto the whole transmedia concept, but it's telling stories, as far as I understand it, telling stories through multiple forms of media. So the music, the visual, on social media, across multiple social media platforms. And that's been interesting for me because I've had to sort of stretch my brain to think in different ways in terms of what is the social media voice of a transmedia campaign sound like? How does that tie in with the audio that I've produced as a musician? And then what is the visual story that's being told by Dre's the artist? Because I mean, like for Dre's, you do things visually within the art, within the renders and stuff, within the environment, and I'm just like, oh, I didn't imagine this angle of it. And so it's like, okay, cool. There's something else that we can add in here. For example, the addition of like the paintbrushes and like hinting at like this is actually a painted story. I was like, oh, how do I work that in? And it's like, okay, that's another layer of the story that can be told. So trying to sort of be able to bridge across different media platforms and multimedia storytelling is both exciting and challenging at the same time.
And we are just beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned you have 3 albums, and we're starting with the first album. And you've already released this music a while back when we did the art from Android Repair Shop, Volume 2.
Yep.
We created a bunch of, I guess you could say, pictures, concepts, where is it? Song art, here they are, with video thumbnails. Let me just load these up. So this album is consistent of more or less 12 songs with an introductory prologue, so 13 tracks. Each of them is based on beats, and we created this initial glitch art release about 2 months ago. So in this concept, we started talking of this robot, which is one of the key characters of the story in the future, his origins, which we were doing like these notes from the actual Android repairman who lives in this particular shop close to the trash islands, close to the waterworks. And then we also talk like the issues with the robot, the fate of the Android repairman. Oh, sorry about that, I'm not available. Clients. Okay. And so we're talking about this particular story of this character with the glitch art, which has its own little story here, but now we're talking about the actual character as the Android repairman. So we're doing this transmedia project, publishing on his Twitter account as the actual character or persona. In this persona, he's going to be talking about each song, each neighborhood. He's going to be talking about the world, and the little micro stories that's happening inside this world as a setup or a ground or foundation for the other albums of a space opera. The first videos that we have of this, which is a full-on story, I'll give you a quick little sneak peek. Should we show them a sneak peek of what's happening?
Sure, why not?
All right. I'll show the shots out of order, and these will just be some of the shots, but we're doing storytelling. We're using the Painterly concept. These are pre-rendered. These were just done just for layout and animation. But we've got a full music video that's coming in and releasing this evening. And I have to sprint to finish it. But it's a hair width, or what is it? It's a hair width or the skin of the teeth distance from being finished. So the story is we have a character, we have the opinion of the Android repairman, and he's having a Twitter rhetoric, also on Instagram, possibly on TikTok, and also the music videos on YouTube, talking about the world, going in depth into how this world came to be, what's it made of, and he's telling it on Paint, which we developed with Evie inside of Bforartists, and with Iyad's help, we've been working on the tool sets to help us get the job done, including improvements in the asset browser so that you get the list view, thanks to Rainer, including the brush and the vertex paint brushes, thanks to Iyad, which I really needed for this particular work since we use a lot of vertex paint for the color, and many, many, many other aspects that make work easier instead of doing it inside of vanilla Blender. So it's super exciting. This is the news that I wanted to share. So where do you see yourself taking this project? How often do you plan to publish these videos or these pieces? Can you tell us a little bit more about this Android repairman and your publishing schedule? What can we see in the next 3 months?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is dependent on your ability to sprint through it all, right, Trace? But we're looking at a video a week for the next 3 months, one for each song, as Dre's mentioned. So that's and it'll, obviously going to be on YouTube and then you'll be able to see snippets of the storytelling and the world building on Twitter and Instagram. It's funny how the story sort of starts to tell itself as you make the music. I did an Android repair album, a volume 1, where I got musician friends to leave me voice messages asking for music droids and their various droids to be repaired. And then when it came to volume 2, which is the project Dre's and I are working on, I asked some friends who aren't musicians to leave me voice messages for the Android repairman, and they misinterpreted it as leaving a, like an Android phone repair. And so the joke ended up being that I've got all these people the Android repairman has all these people calling his shop asking him to repair his phone, and he's just getting progressively more and more frustrated because he's like, I'm a robot repairman. I don't do Android phones, but they keep leaving him these messages for these phones, which was completely not intentional. But then the joke kind of told itself. I was like, we're just gonna roll with this because it's hilarious. So there's bits of humor in it, which. But as the story goes on, the humor sort of fades out and it starts taking a really darker dystopian sci-fi tone.
Ooh,
and the Android repairman
himself,
yeah, the Android repairman himself is, I mean, obviously, as an artist, you sort of write from your perspective and you sort of create out of your perspective. So it's like there's a lot of my worldview in there and how I view things, and there's just been, obviously, there's levels of frustration with being an artist in a time where it's like. The entire landscape changes and the value of music has gone from sellable to free and all of these various aspects that have changed the landscape. And then like there's days where you're like, man, I feel like an old man. Maybe I just don't know anymore. And so this is kind of the same voice of the repairman. Like, man, I used to have a pretty good shot and I used to think I was pretty good at this stuff, but now I just have to pay the bills. And so this music thing is just going to be like a creative outlet for my stress release while I get these bills paid by repairing robots. So you get a lot of sort of disgruntled, on the social media, you get a lot of disgruntled sort of
rhetoric, I guess you could say.
Worker kind of, yeah, like anti-capitalist kind of rhetoric from him, which again is not too far of a stretch from where I am. So it's fun in that I kind of get to keep my voice in there, but it's fun because I also get to be a little
role
humorous
playing
with it, and a little I can exaggerate a bit and things like that. So
excellent. Whew, so I'm excited. This is the beginning. Just recently, we've been publishing an average of 3 images, 1 video per day. Short little video with the audio from the album, music. We got a full-on video that we'll be releasing this evening. And yeah, so this is the project I wanted to introduce you. So I guess if you want to follow the story, give DG Unknown a follow and also give me Trinity Media a follow on Twitter and also give DG Unknown a follow on his YouTube account. Do you have a link tree or a website yet?
The link tree, but I don't know if it has my YouTube on it. So
okay. We can sort that out for later, no problem.
Yep.
But it's exciting. I've put a lot of love into this project, as you guys may have seen, and it has been the flagship of Bforartists, mainly because you've done a lot of development for this project, similar to what the Blender Foundation does with their short films. Not very official. We are third-party sponsors for Bforartists since it is money-free, volunteer-based, open-source code. But we'll see what comes out from this project, the types of stories, the art, and a lot of things to do. That's great. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to open up the microphone to those of you who are here on Discord, which is a nice, friendly crowd. If you have questions about this project, feel free to write it in the chat, or you can open up your microphone. And also, if you have more questions about what's coming with Bforartists, what's new, what's the differences with Blender, what's the benefits or the cons, what would you like in the future, feel free. So if anyone has a question, let me know and we can open it up for either Iyad or Ojex or myself to answer them.
I got a question.
Sure.
Is there going to be a watch party tonight?
Watch party?
Yeah, man. Like a premiere?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do
Hell
it.
yeah.
I still don't have the time confirmed. This will depend heavily on my hardware. But yeah, let's do a watch party. It
Sweet.
should be later in the evening. For those of you who are in Europe, it might be a bit late though. But we'll be following through with the release with some publicity tomorrow as well. Maybe on Sunday
Yeah,
as well.
I don't sleep anyway.
You don't sleep anyway. It's too hot, I bet you.
Yes.
That sounds good. I'll talk with you, Colin Ojax, after, so that we can sort that out later.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, what else? Let's take a look at the comments. So Bonsai Joe has mentioned that he loves the tension between the freedom to do anything and the necessity of survival in a creative context, which is something we struggle with every day. I do this work often. This project has been a long one, principally because I also take on other clients at the same time. So sometimes things have dragged out a bit more than I had hoped, but we're finishing up soon. So I understand that creative context of the need to survive, and at the same time the creative freedom that we have with this particular project, which you're probably one of the best clients in this case because of this creative freedom. I'm Kind of Drunk as mentioned. Say that again. I'm Kind of Drunk has mentioned that the fact that the product is 3D is absurd. And Slink asks, will the music videos be on YouTube? They will be. He's also asked, you have an overarching story or arcing story over multiple albums? Yes. Everything will be tied together into the same story. Maybe different timelines, but yes. Like you get to have one story and one music piece. Yes, these would be, I guess you could say, similar stories. You could play detective with this project. The idea is that we're giving out information so that you can piece together more about the world in an interactive way. Feel free to ask questions on and get involved with the role play. Maybe you too could be a character in this. Who knows?
Well, that's been the fun part, is like a lot of the guys who worked on the next project where I actually have vocalists on it are now going to be characters in the next set of the storytelling. So we're already sort of, setting up that piece as well. So
That's
yeah,
already
it's
there.
fun. It is interactive in a certain way.
That's great. All right, no other comments for today, so I guess we'll tie it up. So,
Oh yeah, I do have a question.
yes.
The shader you made is like kind of messy, and it looks like it's very hard to make a focus point with the shader. And I see you did it. You made man.
Yeah.
How?
How?
Yes.
So, for
How?
example, well, here's an example with this particular shot here. How do we make a focus point when we have a lot of paint and the paint is very messy and like I wanted this very visceral, lots of paint slapped on, thick paint where you're just pushing colors all over the place and paint over paint over paint. I wanted this kind of visceral feel of it, but at the same time I needed to work on a concept of focus. So to do that, I used a technique which I've talked about here often. In the previous Q&As was my, I guess you could say, my sunny rain post-processing technique. So with this particular shot here, notice that here I can't see the robots very well because I wanted it to be a reveal. So in this case, I have these particles, which I use geometry nodes with to create some incoming refraction effects or post-processing effects from the shaders inside of a point cloud that is culled by the camera and the distance from the camera. So I use this to create this atmospheric paint depth with the shower sunny rain effect, so I can see the world and put a painterly that's in 3D on top of the shader. And then when I move the camera closer, as if it was a drone with a zoom camera, it zooms into these robots, I can use another 3D post-processing geometry that can do color balancing and color contrast. So in this case, yellow contrasts quite well on blue because it's on the other end of the spectrum. So I used a yellow post-processing paint strokes on top of the geometry to contrast with this blue sham colors in the background that shows up when the camera gets closer. So when you see this animated tonight, you'll be able to see, hopefully, my legibility of what's happening inside everything would work a bit better. Same thing with the way that I frame the characters. In the future, I use a lot of strong lighting and some pen line art work on the characters to make the key characters pop out a bit more than the other characters in the rest of the world. So a lot of it's with lighting, it's with framing. I'm still working on it, but obviously I assume the later chapters of this or the next album will be a lot higher quality, but for now, this is where we're at. Same with these shots here. As you can see, yellow on green is very bright. And with that, you can see the character a bit more using the principles that I have been teaching over the past Q&As over the past 6 months or so. Basically, color contrast and luminance contrast. And I've tried to develop the tools so that it's easier to paint these contrasts by moving an object and changing some parameters to get the colors that I need, throwing in a light so that I don't need to repaint anything, and I just work the techniques that I need to get the right composition. So Bonsai Joe has another good question. He's asking, can you talk about some of the things that came from the exploration with Trace that put you back into the source material? This is for you, Ajax.
Yeah, that's a good question actually, because all the music was written and done when I came to Dre's with the concept. So it was like handing off the project and then having him take and I had a very loose narrative around the story, like the overarching story and the general plot, and through these, the various storyboarding and the ideas, Dre's really started to put more life into the story and challenge me with ideas. So what that did was it didn't change the music, but it started to flesh out what is the narrative, who are the characters, where is it taking place. All of these questions became much more specific, and that has allowed us then to now explore in this transmedia campaign, like the true art of telling a story through text, like a written story, through the visual medium and all. So that's what's really been a huge benefit of the collaboration. Is the music was it was more conveying feelings, just the emotion behind what the story is, without specific narrative. Now we're putting the specific narrative in place, which is really cool for me because it's almost like somebody's helping me put the words behind what was being felt. And that's actually made the whole process more interesting in terms of writing music. Like, I don't know that I'm gonna, nowadays I'm much less interested in just making a one-off song for the sake of a song. Now I want to tell stories because this whole process has been much more creatively rewarding. So it's opened up a lot of different avenues for going back to writing music and source material. But generally speaking, it's been back and forth on the narrative.
That's an excellent answer. I'm glad you like it this way because it has also been very gratifying of me to have this kind of freedom to also set the foundation for the visual concept of what your music tells me as well. So to me, that has been extremely gratifying to have that creative freedom. Like as a client, or even, I would consider this even a commission. Not a lot of clients give you a brief where you have the ability to create from the ground up based on inspiration. And I think this is very rare, and I'm very thankful for that, and also your patience with the project. Because with that, it gave us the ability to not just work on the client parameters, like, okay, I need to do this, and this by this, and this amount of time for this amount of price. Having the ability to be allowed to create freely with a concept and an idea and a tech and an art is something very rare, and I just wanted to say, I'm very thankful for that. This is where we started, and this is where we are now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot
Well, you're
more to
welcome,
come.
Drew. It's not something that I'm consciously like, it's the way I look at the whole project. It's creativity first. Like I'm not. I guess it's because I'm not sitting here with like I'm a corporate client that has a deliverable for whatever, a commercial or something that has to be. To me, the end product and telling the story is more important than a specific timeline. So the fact that you have this sort of energy that you're committing to it and this passion for it is like, that's more important to me than like, oh, the video is supposed to drop and maybe the render is a little late. Like I could care less about those details. I want the story told the right way.
Me too. Though I am skipping nights to get this done, so don't worry, I am doing it.
I appreciate that.
Subtly dropped that in. Yeah, I'm just losing sleep over this project.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so you know.
But it is worth it.
Darius, I have a question about Bforartists.
Yeah, sure.
The updates, how does that work? Like, is it only a master release update, or you also have smaller updates?
Every week we have a development update. So if you go to bforartists.de, let me just get the link for you.
Germany.
Yes, that's right. It's a German project. If you go to the downloads page, it's a very old WordPress website. I'd like to update this. But we have the official release, which is based on the same release cycle as Blender. We still use the master, but hopefully it hasn't deviated too much by code. Typically, Blender forks an official release maybe 2 or 3 weeks before they release a release. So the code only deviates a little bit, and the code that they do in an official release merges to master, so that when a Bforartists release comes out, even though it's based on the master, it should be pretty close concerning features and stability and bug fixes from the official release. So this is frozen in time. We do this, we create a branch, and then we make a release, Windows release, in Linux release, a Mac release for later. But then every week, with Iyad's help, and also his dedication and whatever support that I can get him, or we can get him, he helps me do a merge every week. So together we work on developing the new features and also updating the Blender features every week. So this gets done usually on Saturday or Sunday, and these videos, these distributions usually get uploaded as a zip file onto the same website. Just scroll down every Saturday or Sunday. So with that, we usually have an Ubuntu zip and a Windows zip.
Is there like a way I can auto update these things, or not really?
We have been talking with the Blender Launcher developers, and we've been kindly requesting that they include it inside the Blender Launcher. And they said they may, but I can't guarantee when that will happen or how that will happen. Maybe I should make a fork of the Blender Launcher and make a Bforartists launcher. I'm not sure, but this will take some time. But for now,
currently I use Steam.
Steam
to update.
Oh, okay.
My Blender.
We had a look at using Steam, but unfortunately the GNU license is technically incompatible with Steam. I don't know how Blender's doing it, to be honest.
Cool.
But maybe I'll take another look at that. A good point. We still need to think about that, because obviously this is a volunteer project, and because it's a volunteer project, we do this in our free time if we have any. And with that, it's not really run by a foundation a la Blender. So the DevOps is usually a little bit slower than Blender. That's why we only focus on the interface and not on features. But I was taking a look at the Windows app releases, which could be auto-updated from the App Store or the Windows Microsoft Store. And maybe I should take another look at Steam as well. But this would depend on how much support we get. If you support Iyad or me, one way or another, it will make our life a little bit easier to keep on doing better work with this in the future.
You mentioned before, you said something about the Blender launcher. Blender has an automatic update launcher or something?
Yeah, there's a third-party application.
I don't know how to use that. Okay. You download it? What is it, like a...
It's like a little
Where can I get
interface.
information?
Yeah, there's like a...
If you could send like a link.
Sorry, let me just see if I can find it. On GitHub by .bow. I'll just upload that into the chat. You can download it there for free. It gives you a little interface that like neatly organizes all of the versions that you want. Daily, experimental, or stable. It gives you the option to download whichever version you want, either the dailies or the stables, and then it stores them as a library where you can just click on launch and it will load that version of the particular Blender. Version by date, by state, by stable releases, etc.
It doesn't, like, let's say you have application on your desktop. It doesn't, like, replace it?
Now this is an extracted zip. That's all it is. It's a separate application. You have to set in your settings, you have to choose a folder where you want to store all of your Blender releases. But once you have that set up, you are good to go. You have like a folder with, and it basically what it does is it downloads the zips from the server and extracts it for you and keeps it inside a nice little neat GUI.
Cool. Steam just, you have it auto update and you just update it. And you have the newest Blender version, alpha or beta or whatever you want.
I should take a look into that again.
What's it called? Aaron once on one of his live streams like mentioned it.
Oh,
So
cool.
ever since then, that's what I'm using.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll put that into my to-do list. Definitely. Okay, so thanks for the question, Shmuel and Joe and Slink. And also thank you, Ojax, for your depth inside the project and also for the opportunity to work on it. And I'm really looking forward to the next 3 months of publishing every week. I hope you guys find it very entertaining and also beautiful and interesting. And also thank you, Iyad, for all your work with Bforartists. I really appreciate it. And hopefully you get even more support for what you do, both for Blender and for Bforartists. And for those of you who have connected, also thank you for being here until the very end and for another session. So I'm going to do a quick little plug. Basically, I do this every week. If you'd like your art to be showcased, or if you'd like to be a special guest, if you'd like to also have us take a look at your art in the future, feel free to drop it in the Q&A&Critique chat or drop me a private message on any social network. And I will see you here, same time, same place, 2000 UTC every Friday. And thanks. That's it. This was the Q&A&Critique number 53. 4, sorry. 54. Alright, I'm going offline now.